advice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you don't run.
Howdy, Rob.
Hello, Matt.
Yeah, hi. It's another episode of Dungeon Master of None.
That's right. We're back to the basics. We're gonna do what it is that we say we're gonna do. We're gonna talk about being game masters, being dungeon masters, the act of running, planning, executing games, a true feat of organizational prowess, mental fortitude, and emotional resilience.
I compare myself to a member of the armed services or a first responder. It's on that level. It's another episode of our untitled or uncatalogued series of In the Garage. Just like in the Weezer song, we've got the Dungeon Master's Guide, where we go back to various Dungeon Master's Guides. We've looked at 4th editions, AD&D's Dungeon Master's Guide, and a couple other systems, and it's time for another system. We're looking at Pathfinder 2nd edition's Gamemastery Guide. That's
right, and I've got here my pocket edition. I never go anywhere without it. It's not actually, I have to admit, it's not really pocket-sized. It is smaller than the full-size book, but it's still. It would not fit in my pocket, I guess is what I'm saying. Maybe somebody else's pocket. Maybe a different pocket. Maybe like those big like Jinko jeans pockets.
Yeah.
But it's smaller.
Well, mine is truly pocket size, or like Heward's handy haversack size, because I bought the digital version, which I can pull up on my phone, which actually does go in my pocket.
That's right.
So. Take that. One of the great things about all of Paizo's products is that you can buy a hardcover or you can buy a PDF. And guess what? The PDF does not cost as much as the hardcover.
That's right.
It costs a reasonable amount of money, usually like $10 to $15. It's great.
It's really great. I'm frankly never going to forgive Wizards for not doing it. It's ridiculous that this is not something that is offered by every game company of a reasonable size. It's absolutely bewildering. But yeah,
selling PDFs, it's like selling tickets on a train or a bus. There's not usually really much of a limited amount, right? They don't need to be expensive.
Yeah.
They don't need to cost the price of a full book. The searchable features of D&D Beyond are not worth it. But on to Pathfinder 2. There's a lot of general useful advice for running games. So if you don't play Pathfinder 2, there's a lot to love here. And of course, there's a lot of good stuff for the Pathfinder system. It's kind of like a nice combo of Dungeon Master advice for rules of Pathfinder 2, a bestiary focused on humanoid NPCs, and a bunch of variant rules.
If you'll forgive a brief digression here, I think we might have talked about this before, but I was reminded while reading this that the problem, and I suppose the opportunity of a Dungeon Master Guide, a Game Master Guide, is that it has to do double duty, right? Especially for systems like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, in that it has to, or theoretically it's supposed to, tell you how to run a game, but then it also needs to include all of the bits and bobs and rules and details on things that players don't need to know about, things like environmental hazards, traps, NPCs, etc. And I wonder sometimes if these ought not be two separate books, not to suggest that people need to buy more books, but trying to cram them both into a single volume sometimes becomes unwieldy. I think that Pathfinder does a really good job of it, but I was just thinking, half of this book is pertinent advice on how to put a game together, and, well, actually maybe like a quarter of this book, and then 3/4 of it is very important and relevant rules, but those rules may or may not be relevant to actually running a game of any sort, including a Pathfinder game. But both are necessary. You need both, really, just in case.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Dungeon Master's Guide. I've always imagined it as you have your secret lore. that only you get to know.
Right.
These are the optional rules. They're only for the dungeon master. I did notice compared to the Game Mastery guide from first edition that the like how to play a game, how to run a game is cut way down. You know, and if you're an experienced dungeon master, do you really need to read an example of play again? Probably not. But I will say the first edition one has like some great advice on like fixing a broken game. Like if you've never run a role-playing game before, it's got like 4 pages on you should have a room. You know, you should have like pen and paper and shit like that. You should make sure it's in a quiet place that's in a low traffic area of the house. And obviously, yeah, maybe if you've ever played in a game once, you should kind of pick all that stuff up. But it is always nice to read. But
yeah,
okay,
the second edition book definitely assumes a level of proficiency, and it makes sense that this would be aimed at more experienced DMs. But that basic section is useful because somebody at some point is going to just buy it and be like, great, what do I do? And it's nice to have, like you said, an example of play and here's literally what to do to run a game. But that's okay. There's still a lot of good basic advice in this.
Yeah, let's dive into some of that basic advice, starting with the first chapter after the introduction, Game Mastery Basics. And maybe we'll just go back and forth pointing out some like very useful things that are in here, because this is a lot of bits and bobs of the how to run a game type. One I really liked is the basic advice on include NPCs, but make sure they're limited, right? My favorite sentence here is avoid including allied NPCs who could easily solve any of the problems the PCs get assigned, right?
Yeah. I liked this NPC section, and it comes very early, obviously very, very early in the book. There's just a few paragraphs on basics of how to handle NPCs, including when to introduce them, how much detail to include, how to, if they need to die or retire, what happens. And yeah, this is a very good section on not including GMPCs. There's a sentence I liked from that, Matt, was, remember that an NPC is not your character in the way that each player has a character. It has been a long time since I have been subjected to a GM or DMPC, but it's clearly not a problem that is going away, and it's good to have it laid out very explicitly like this. I think that, again, this is just one paragraph, but it gets to the heart of it, and I think it lays things out very clearly. I liked the whole section on, and this is high-level stuff on NPCs, there's more later in the book, but how to think about where NPCs fit in your game. I thought this was very, very well done.
Yeah, there are a bunch of little sections here of like kind of general wisdom that I want to say is like an upgrade over the days of Pathfinder 1's Game Mastery Guide, which is like have a session 0. Here, variety is the spice of life when pacing your game. Make sure the stakes and consequences are appropriate. Failing forward, right? Not something that's
failing forward
really...
is one of my favorite sections from this introduction or this Game Mastery Basics. I liked this a lot. It's, again, this is not super advanced, and we've talked about it a bunch, but it's just, it means that even if you fail, something happens. You find a way to progress the story rather than just saying that didn't work. And this is critical advice, especially in a game like Pathfinder or D&D, where there are lots of rolls that you will fail. And it's unlike other systems where there's partial or limited successes. It is just a straight up, down, you did or you didn't. And learning how to move the game forward even when players fail rolls is a difficult but very valuable skill.
Yeah, another thing I liked was talking about some general advice for improvisation and like, what to do when you're not sure what should happen. And there's like a great set of guiding questions, like what does the player expect to happen, right? What would the personality of an NPC tell me to do? Does something that's happened before in our story guide my hand here? It's like, these are questions that I think are better on the back of a DM screen than like a table for drowning rules or whatever you often get.
Right. Yeah. I would much rather have a list of things to help me with improvisation than all of the environmental rules that are on the back of a DM screen.
Often a player will ask, quoting here, "What happens when I do that?" This is a good indicator the player expects that what they've done will draw a reaction from the NPC or the environment. And yes, unless the player's way off base, go with that, right?
I liked that sentence a lot too. I thought that was a very, very keen observation and something that's worth keeping in mind, right? Your players are expecting something to happen, so unless you have a good reason for something not to happen, go with it. Run with it. I liked that sentence a lot. I thought that was a very good, and I would call this all like medium level. This is GM advice 201. This is more than the basics. So I really liked reading through this, and this is a very short section, but there was a lot of good stuff here.
Right. The next couple sections are divided into Pathfinder's sort of 3 modes of play: encounters, exploration, and downtime. These are pretty universal for fantasy role-playing games. So let's start with encounters. And this is obviously a big one. Pathfinder 2 is got a finely tuned encounter system and action economy and stuff we've all talked about, but there's a lot of really good advice for every game in this one.
Yeah, you can tell that the designers of Pathfinder think very hard about encounter design and how to run encounters. And we've talked before about how it feels kind of gamey to divide playtime into 3 distinct modes. It feels kind of video gamey to have exploration mode and downtime mode and combat mode. But the more that time goes on, the more that I play other tactical games that are not divided like this, the more I appreciate it. It's an imperfect, but ultimately I like it. Their advice on encounters is really, really good. I loved this bullet point list of like what your job is as a GM, and it's answering questions quickly and decisively whenever possible, building anticipation for what happens next, emphasizing thrilling action and setting a rapid pace, letting players know when they're up and preferably when they're on deck to go next, and showing immediate consequences of actions. Again, this is a great thing. This would be a great thing to put on the back of your DM screen. It's also just a good thing to keep in mind when you're running a combat encounter. Is that's what your role is, right? Is to keep things moving and to make sure everyone's paying attention and to make decisions quickly, basically, which is challenging, but it's worth bearing in mind.
I mean, we all kind of agree that like combat should go faster in every role-playing game we've played. I cannot remember the last time as a player or a dungeon master I'm like, man, I wish that combat had really lasted a lot longer, you know.
Yeah.
So and Pathfinder this is maybe one of the flaws of the system. It's not the fastest game, and 5th edition is faster, though it not as fast as it felt when I first played it. It's just, you should always be trying to make sure you're keeping that pace up.
Yeah.
These are the things you got to do to make that happen.
I also really liked what they focused on when it comes to speed of play, because they're clearly conscious of this issue. And I think that Pathfinder 2nd edition is a lot better than 1st edition. And I think it's
for sure
pretty quick. If you're the difference is, in my opinion, and this is hot take, I guess, if your players all know what they're doing in 2nd edition, combat goes pretty quickly because there's an answer for everything and there's rules and it's clear and you know what to do. Even if everybody knows what they're doing in 5th edition, it can still kind of slog because there's enough things that can trip you up even for experienced players. And it's supposed to be faster, but it's not as much faster as it's supposed to be, I guess is the thing.
I would say it's like this, like 5th edition is by default faster, but in like 60% of encounters, something will come up that creates a pause. And in Pathfinder, you're less likely to encounter.
Yes,
in my experience.
That's the same as my experience. The speed floor is higher in 5th edition, but the ceiling is about the same for both games.
Yeah.
Anyway, the things that they emphasize that I like is looking up rules, which is I'm sure all of you are experienced with, something that will slow down every single game and is deeply frustrating. And their advice is really good. There's the advice is, if it's not too important, just make a ruling and move on. Try to stick with it. Tell players that they can look it up when it's not their turn. That sort of thing. It also suggests that you can deputize this. This is all advice that we've given, but the important point is to not let looking up rules slow your game down. And there's a bunch of very precise advice about how not to do that. The thing you don't want to do, you want to avoid at all costs, is stopping the flow of combat to pull out the rule book and double check something, because that flies in the face of all your bullet points, the things that you're supposed to be doing.
Another example they give for speeding up play, and this is one that I really love, is enemies don't need to make perfect decisions. It's usually better to make a decision quickly than to pick the perfect enemy tactic. It's just like a reminder, like your villains are there to be the foil. The monsters are there to be the foil for the heroes. If they do something stupid, they use an effect on someone it doesn't harm. Like, it lets the players be like, you fool. I have an ability that lets me ignore that. And it usually helps them feel powerful, and it's fun.
That's right. Yeah, I like to play smart villains, but not every single one, right? The players should encounter groups of dumb bandits and thugs who make mistakes and focus on the wrong thing and run away and, behave foolishly, who are not constantly making optimal tactical decisions at all time. Those are fun encounters, but I think they should be the minority, right? When you are facing a particularly challenging foe or group of foes. I
think one of the other interesting things building on speed of play is some advice to be like pretty encouraging and permissive when you let players use skills and abilities to do different things. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, the skill you use for initiative is normally perception, but you can use a different skill if you're doing a different thing. And it says, be really generous with that as long as players can justify it with the narrative. At the end of the day, it's not that big of a deal, and it encourages people to, play characters in different ways, which is one of the more exciting things about class-based role-playing games.
There's really good advice about this, and there's a related section on the next page on ad hoc bonuses and penalties. I like this a lot. And what this is about is, if your players set up something interesting, or they say, we string a rope across the chasm to drop something on the enemies, can we get a bonus on our, whatever given roll? If they come up with something clever, right? Do you give how much bonus do you give them, and how do you go through that? And again, there's a list of questions, and I really like this style or this approach. And the questions are: is this a result of an interesting, surprising, or novel strategy by the character? Did this take effort or smart thinking to set up? Is it easy to replicate in pretty much every battle? Right? These are 3 great questions. If they put in effort and it was clever, give them a bonus. If they can do it every single time, don't. This is the whole, this is a bad example, but like the rats in a sack type of thing to, charge certain abilities that are based on kills. That is technically like clever thinking and requires setup, but also it's something that you can do every single battle. So don't reward that. But if they come up with something related to the environment or unique to the situation, absolutely give them a bonus for that.
Right. It's like, if they get the high ground, if they throw dust in the enemy's face, you got to ask yourself, okay, you have basically, I think, 2 good options instead of just saying no, is you can say, yes, but this is a one-time thing, right? or and still give them a bonus. Everyone feels happy. Your player probably didn't want to have to throw sand in every enemy's eyes every single time. Or you can, if it's something that like you actually enjoy, you can kind of just say yes, right? 5th edition gives no bonuses for being on high ground. But if you're like, oh, I always, if that makes sense to me and my players don't do any tactical maneuvering and that's something we want to have at our table, then just let it apply every single time, right? If you say it's going to happen every single time, you'll encourage that behavior.
It's just really good advice. It's clearly advice from people who have run lots of games and experienced lots of these problems, and it's well considered.
The next one I wanted to talk about is sense motive or insight in 5th edition. I feel like this is one of the hardest skills or like abilities in Pathfinder. I believe it's an action, right?
Yes, it is.
To adjudicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because either players think it's like a real lie detector test, not like the fake machine that we have in our time, or it's or dungeon masters treat it as it's completely worthless, and it's a tricky one to adjudicate. I like the advice here, right? With a like a nice catch-all line. They aren't behaving normally, right? When you're not sure what to say, but they kind of got a success or close to it, or something like that, or they're not telling the players the whole truth, and it's fine, as it says, to quote here. However, sometimes dropping a punchy, "Oh, she is 100% lying," like that is great. Players love that.
Is great. Yeah, I really liked this section, and it doesn't have any. It doesn't resolve the problem, but it approaches it well. And the problem is that players think that it's a lie detector test, and insight in 5th edition is one of my favorite skills. I love to have players ask or make insight checks, but even a success is unsatisfying to them. If they roll really well and I say he appears to be telling the truth, he's acting normally, they're like, well, is he telling the truth? I'm like, he appears to be telling the truth. And there, there's some people will be satisfied with it, but it's a limitation of the skill. But I really like the skill. I think it's more of a learning to use it as written, and it's the same for sense motive in 2nd edition.
Well, the other good advice is what I find more common than players being unsatisfied with. Yeah, you think they're telling the truth. At my table is other players kind of forget about the skill often. And then when someone makes an insight check, everyone like jumps on. I'm like, well, I want to see if they're lying. I'm like, well, it has perfect advice. It's like, don't make another check until the situation has changed. Right?
Yes.
You can bring up a new topic of conversation or approach them at a different time and make another insight check. But like that moment is over, right? I think that's a pretty good approach to take.
Yeah, my tables do the same thing. Is they're like, well, let's all make insight checks.
Right. All right.
This is good
we
advice.
Pause. Everyone rolls. Someone's like, well, I actually have a slightly higher bonus. I'm like, well, you weren't doing the talking. All right. So, I encourage you to ask them another thing, and then we can make another insight check.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of advice for running grid-based combat and aerial combat, mounted combat. There are, listen, Pathfinder is a great game for running on a grid.
Yes. Really
it definitely falls apart a little bit without a grid. But I think this guide is a little upfront about that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Not all
it
games
does have
can
advice
be played gridless.
for gridless games. It's just there's so many tactical rules in Pathfinder that if you don't have a grid, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities. So there's some really good advice after.
Oh, sorry. Can we go back to one piece of advice we skipped over that I actually just kind of disagree with a little bit?
Oh.
So it's on the spiciest topic we've talked about. It's metagaming, right?
Oh,
so,
yes.
Okay. Metagaming is knowledge players have that their characters don't, right?
Yep.
That's how it's defined here in this book. And it gives 2 examples, right? It says, the wizard aiming a fireball precisely enough to include 3 enemies at the very edge of the spell's area is probably unrealistic in the heat of combat, but it isn't disruptive to play. Absolutely, right? You should be able to put your fireball where you want it. Like, you should be able to behave in a tactically advantageous way, even if in the heat of battle, your wizard with poor eyesight probably couldn't do that. It's magic.
Yes.
The other example they say is things get more questionable if the player says, that's a Rakshasa, so don't use divine spells against it, right? Regardless of whether their character has encountered a Rakshasa before or identified the creature. Here's the thing about that is, I think from a player's perspective, right? You could take a 5th edition example, maybe one that's more common, right? Oh, that's a troll. We should use fire damage against it so it doesn't regenerate. Or it's a hydra, like you need to burn the stumps so 2 heads don't grow back. It is really hard at the end of the day to take that, knowledge away from players. And you can ask them, as the advice is, oh, your character wouldn't know that. But once you go down that rabbit hole, there's a lot of things your character won't know. My perspective is if a character knows something like that, or if a player knows something like that, it's fine if their character knows something like that. They heard it in a story somewhere. Just encourage them to explain, instead of saying, how would your character know that? I usually say, why don't you explain to your party how your character knows that? Like, assume in good faith, like, that their character picked it up somewhere. It's easier on everyone. At the end of the day, I don't care. Maybe I'm out in left field on this.
No, I think you're right. And the sort of proof here is that if you had your players encounter a man in a cape with a widow's peak in a dark castle, and he had fangs and, turned into a bat, and they were like, that's a vampire. You wouldn't be like, you don't know that. How would you know that he's a vampire? And then if they
you're from a village that doesn't have any vampires, how would you know?
You've never encountered a vampire before, but if they do the same thing with a Rakshasa or an obscure monster, right? Like you might, but you would never like punish your players for knowing to use fire against a troll, or that that vampires are,
means that player is good at Dungeons and Dragons. They played the game before. It's okay.
So where do you draw the line? Like, right? Are they to be punished for knowing that what they call a blink dog can blink? It's that a rust monster will rust their weapons. Like, I don't know. I agree. Just if they use knowledge that's out of game knowledge, I agree with Matt. Just be like, you heard it somewhere, or you there's other ways that you might have gained this information. You heard a rumor or a story or something like that.
It feels bad to be the like negative Nancy as the dungeon master, right? And I get, if you're a dungeon master and you have done this before, so have I, right? Because I get where it comes from. You're like, well, how would you know this about this thing, that is like super obscure? And one of the problems with a lot of monster and encounter design in Dungeons and Dragons is it's all like nullified or something if you know the one secret thing, like, clay golems, you need to cast, a stone to mud on them or something like that.
Right.
It's like, well, fine. Just, it's rewarding people who've played the game that long. Like, at the end of the day, to me, it doesn't matter that much. And I think way better just ask them for a fun explanation. You may add some depth to someone's character.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's a good point.
I mean, on the topic of like metagaming more broadly, like I often find it comes up at my table when my party splits, right? And like one group is in a bad situation and the other group would have no way of knowing that.
Right.
And even then, sometimes I'm like, and again, maybe I'm completely wrong on this advice. Like if the other group's like, we got to hurry and get back and see how everyone's doing. I'm like, well, that's just kind of the rule of the camera, right? Action starts speeding up when tension mounts, even if it's off screen for some players.
Yeah. I tend to be a little bit of a stickler about that. If players can't talk to each other or things are happening in different rooms, in different areas, I'm like, no, there's no way you can tell that to them. You have to act as if you don't know. But I'm not an asshole about this. Like, it's just like not worth it to me to like I try to keep my players on the straight and narrow when it comes to metagaming, but I'm not gonna. It's at the end of the day a game, so I'm not gonna be a hard ass about it. Metagaming is both a real problem and one of the most exaggerated problems that the DMs have to deal with. Like Matt said, it's just not a big deal if your players know some monster lore ahead of time. If it's so critical to your encounter that if they know it, they'll beat the encounter, then change it. Make it a variant monster. I mean, don't be a dick, but like make it a weird troll that's healed by fire or something like that. That's well within the rules.
Okay.
Sorry, don't do that. Don't do that specifically. But I'm just saying, like, if
that one
if,
might not be so great.
That one might not be nice, but just something like that. You can change things.
Yeah.
You can make your own monsters.
Part of every game is the metagame, but yeah, I also have to be a stickler about it, which is why, Rob, when we did our Europa Universalis 4 multiplayer match and you want to play as the Ottomans, I told you couldn't, because you would have no way of knowing as a person in the year 1444 that the Ottomans would actually be really that powerful.
That's
so
right.
I made you play as Albania instead.
That's right.
You were out of the game in 10 minutes.
I picked the country with the greatest general, Skanderberg. So the obvious thing that anybody in the year 1444 would do.
Yeah, everyone thought Skanderberg would be a great power one day. And no one would have picked the Ottomans. So yeah, I don't allow picking of Ottomans in my game. Anyway, what about exploration encounters?
Well, one thing before we get to running exploration, I like this bit on unexpected difficulty. They've got advice here on what happens if an encounter is more difficult or less challenging than you expected. And both pieces of advice are good, right? If it's too difficult, you can the enemy might offer the PCs a chance to surrender or take them captive. That's frustrating, but it doesn't have to end up in wanton PC murder. I think this is good advice. There's plenty of reasons why enemies might not finish off downed PCs, especially if you don't see them as the threat. Again, this is a game, it's a story, you can do these things. And then I also really like the advice for if your encounter is too easy. And it just says, let the players enjoy it. Let them have fun. Let them win. I every time I have designed an encounter that is meant to be challenging, the group I designed it for just dumpstered it every single time, because the only time I ever do that is for groups that are very good at tactical encounters. And so I really pull out all the stops, and they love that. They love to rise to the challenge and destroy my very carefully designed challenges. And you know what? That's okay. They beat me, and they get to enjoy the fruits of that victory, which is running roughshod over my carefully crafted encounter. That's okay. Release your GM ego and let your players have a good time if they're beating your encounter.
From another's perspective, there's like an overall theme to the advice in this book is it's like, you need kind of rising and falling and leveling action, right? And types of play in this game. And one of those things is from encounters that are tactical and exciting and difficult and have a lot of environmental effects to ones where the players are just, taking names all over the place. It's fine to have lots of easy encounters. In fact, you should maybe even plan some easy encounters in your game. It's it's okay for players. Oh yeah, this is why we've leveled up. We're 6th level now. We will, wipe the floor with whatever this challenge the Dungeon Master set in front of us. That's cool, right? Not every encounter needs to be a struggle where someone is dropping to 0 hit points constantly.
And this is a problem with this is a direct problem that results from the length of encounters, which is because in both Pathfinder and 5th edition, they take so long, even though the Adventuring Day is explicitly supposed to include half a dozen encounters or something like that. Rarely do you ever get more than one or two, and those need to be big, chunky encounters to be challenging. So again, this is another argument for making quicker, better encounters, and if your players are winning, let them win so they can have another encounter that might be a little bit more challenging. The other good piece of advice in this section is consider whether the discrepancy from your expectations is due to luck.
Mm-hmm.
One side benefiting from extreme luck is expected from time to time. Sometimes your players are going to roll really well. Matt, I remember in the Kingmaker game that you ran for us, the first in the original Pathfinder ages ago,
yes.
we had an encounter with a big lizard folk chieftain, and my stupid fighter with his spear, which has like a 3 in Pathfinder, had a 3 times critical bonus or something like that, immediately got a natural 20 and impaled your very tough lizard folk chieftain on his pointy stick, and I could see the disappointment in your face. But
it's
like,
okay though,
it was
you were so happy though.
I was so happy,
fine.
and it was a really lucky roll. And the thing is, that's going to happen sometimes. There are plenty of times where I, as a player, have rolled nothing but less than 10 and gotten walloped by good rolls from my foes, and if that happens, that's okay, just roll with it. The section goes on to say, though, if it's something that you control as the GM, unfavorable terrain or a monster with overpowered abilities, then you can make adjustments. And this is just this is good advice. If your players are losing honestly because of bad rolls, or they're winning honestly because of good rolls, just let it happen. But if you can make adjustments and you have unbalanced the encounter, then you should try to fix it. But yeah, it's worth bearing these things in mind.
Something that is related to this that exists in the kind of bones of Pathfinder, I'm drawing here from the first edition Gamemastery guide, has a great section explaining the probability of dice. In that, like, okay, a D20, which your players are rolling all the time, has like a flat probability, right? Can be a 20 just as easily as a 1. You're rolling multiple dice. The probability groups around the middle, a bell curve, the normal distribution, etc. The only dice, and it helpfully explains, the only dice this doesn't apply to is the D100, because each of the faces isn't added together. They represent a digit. And this is great. The D20 is a flat probability thing, which means that luck is going to come up all the time, and you need to roll with that luck, 99% of the time.
Yeah.
One of the things I like in the next section on exploration is the useful advice on your thinking, and how you need to shift from thinking about rounds and turns to thinking about time, and thinking about time in a cinematic way, right? Which, for I think a lot of people's, for example, 5th edition games, this is the way that time exists, right? Is that, long voyages can be described very quickly, but an intense period of exploring tunnels with lots of traps might slow down, just like in a movie. I love that framing.
I also like, this is another thing that I would love to have on the back of a DM screen. There's a
quick environmental details.
Yes, quick environmental details. I love these. This is, again, there's a little bit on describing evocative environments, and it's like, how do you describe your environment? And this is something that I sometimes have to be reminded by my players to do, because I always know what things look like, and I sometimes forget to give setting details in my excitement to talk about an NPC or get the encounter started. And this is just a great shorthand for whatever area you're in. If you're in the mountains, the plains, you're underground, the swamp, there's just your 5 senses: sight, sounds, smells, textures, and weathers. This is I love this. This is such a good chart. This is more useful than any 10 lists that I've gotten in other games. It's so good. It's just a really quick way to look and be like, you are in a you know, some rocky cliffs and there's howling winds. It smells like seaweed. There's the feel of crunching snow, and the weather is a frigid gale. Like, you know,
Yeah.
it's
Ooh.
just, you know, it's got a bunch of things you can put together in a pinch. I love that.
I honestly wish there were like more of these for
Yes.
like more fantastical terrain and like parts of cities, but these are
Yes.
so good. These need to be on the back of your Dungeon Master screen.
Yes, this is so good.
You know,
Give us more. Yeah.
we're gonna feel like real fools. I actually haven't seen the Gamemastery screen for second
Oh
edition
yeah, actually I have
Pathfinder.
no idea. I have no idea what's
I-
actually on the second edition Gamemastery screen. So maybe it is there. That would be cool.
I have a feeling it's a lot of DC tables. But if we're wrong, Paizo, we're very sorry. There's also a section on running downtime, which you know, there's a lot of tables and stuff for finding lore and tasks and running businesses, retraining. One that I like is for buying and selling, which players, you know, constantly want to do, which is just listen, stop confusing yourselves and pick three easy options. Either the PCs can buy what they want where they want, the PCs can buy what they want, but they must provide additional effort, or they can't buy it here. Magical markets or whatever sort of markets are non-existent in this location. You can apply this to your whole world. You can apply it to a specific location. Just, you know, pick one of those three whenever the players decide they want to do a shopping trip.
This is such a good section, and I love Pathfinder's approach to downtime, which takes it seriously and puts a lot of rules and effort into it. 5th edition has added some things, but it's not part of the core game, and players have a lot of downtime and they want to do things. They want to go shopping, they want to have jobs, they want to run their tavern, they want to go talk to their friends, they want to do things in downtime. And you don't need a lot of like crunchy rules, but you do need some outlines for how to approach that, and this is so good. And yeah, the rules for buying and selling, your game must have this. I will never forgive 5th edition for not having any clear rules on buying, selling magic items, crafting them. Don't come at me. The rules don't make sense. I know they're there, but they're incomprehensible, because this is like not the number one thing. It's like in order of things that players want to do. It's fight monsters, get loot, and then use that loot to buy things. Sometimes option 3 is romance NPCs, but you know, it's at worst the fourth most important thing in the game. And yeah, you need an approach to it, and Pathfinders is perfect. Pick an option, right? Either
Look,
they can
we
just
love
buy-
exchanging money for goods and services.
Yes.
At the end of the day, it's our favorite thing.
We all fantasize about having enough money to buy the things that we want, and that's
the great fantasy.
that's what role playing games are about.
5,000 gold pieces, I can redo my floors finally, or you know, buy a
Right,
Frostbrand sword.
Yeah.
Either one of those two. The other after downtime section is a great section on adjudicating rules, and it's not long. It's just 3 pages, but I just want to read the core principles here, because
these
these
are good.
apply to basically every game system. 1, remember the basics of the rules. 2, be consistent with your past rulings. 3, don't worry if you don't have a specific rule memorized. It's okay to look it up. 4, listen to concise opinions from other players. 5, make a call and get on with play. 6, review your decision after the session is over if necessary.
Again, these are terrific. This is exactly how I approach rule issues, and how you should too. I especially like their section on consistency, right? And this is a thing that I've encountered a bunch, because I get rules wrong sometimes, and I also sometimes have to make split-second decisions. And the thing that I have to do, and I have to tell my players, is look, this is imperfect, but this is the ruling, and I'm going to stick with it until either, you know, the end of the encounter or until we can review it. And as long as you're consistent, players will be, they may not be happy, but they will be satisfied with that outcome, right? If you stick to the ruling that you made, even if it isn't precisely correct, that's okay. Especially if you afterwards, or when there's an opportunity, resolve it and do it correctly going forward. But yeah, it's critically important
Right.
to be consistent, and these core principles are exactly what you should think about.
I like the point on listening to your players as well, right? It goes on to say, the Game Mastery Guide does, approaching the rules as a group problem also means that you should never trivialize player concerns about a rule, right? If players are like confused or frustrated or upset about something, right? Just like listening to their concerns as a group is highly beneficial, right? No one wants to be playing a game where they feel like it's just like whatever's going on over here with, how my wizard's casting a spell doesn't matter to y'all. And then like that really spirals out of control in people's minds. I know it has in mine when no one else seems to give a shit, right?
Mhm.
And just listening, everyone being aware that this is a problem that maybe we'll look up later or come up with a different system. It's fine as long as everyone's heard my end.
Yeah. Yes. Concise is key, but yeah,
concise opinions.
But it is important to listen to everybody, and also to make sure that it's important that people feel heard. This is not a rule that is specific to role-playing games, but it make sure that everybody feels like they are have a voice and you are listening to their concerns, even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
The next section I think is very applicable to a game like Pathfinder, which these labels mean less and less, but is more of a simulationist game than a narrative game, right? You don't have a lot of narrative powers in that broadest sense of the word. The 5th edition is exactly the same, but there's advice on saying yes but. And many role-playing games have like explicit rules for how you say yes but. And this is wonderful as a dungeon master. It makes things super easy.
Yeah.
But 5th edition Pathfinder, they don't have rules for saying yes but when a player tries to do something cool but unusual, or maybe doesn't quite make sense to you but makes sense to them. We have this all the time, right? It's
right.
because people have different perceptions in their imaginative heads of what's going on.
Yeah. This is a thing that has happened to me many times is somebody has a totally different idea of what's happening, or how how an event might occur, or how an object might react, or somebody might react to a certain action. And
sometimes they have a misunderstanding of an NPC's attitude or disposition. Sometimes they have a misunderstanding of the basic laws of physics. But regardless,
it's good to say whenever possible, you want to say yes, but, or,
and here's I think the great like solution is, especially for one of those where it's not like a brilliant like yes and like obviously that's brilliant, is like just throw them a bone. Don't be like, and there's some great examples of this. Give them a fleeting benefit without a roll. Example: they dip their sword into a burning brazier and add 1 fire damage on the next attack roll against a troll. Perfect, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's happy. Okay, yes, they thought their sword would light on fire, like in Game of Thrones, but that's not how coals work or steel or swords work. Maybe if they put some oil on it, what you could be like, well, you got to put some oil on it. No, just give them, give them a fire bonus. Yes, it means the troll won't regenerate, but they're trying,
Yeah, these are great examples. There's one on require a check and then apply a bonus to the PC's action. You can swing from a chandelier, right? There's require a attack against an object and then allow foes to attempt saving throws against that DC, right? You blow up some fire barrels or light some lamps full of oil on fire that produce flame. I mean, these are cool things that your players might want to do, and you should reward them, but you can't give them too much benefit, right? You can't let them win every time they roll a barrel down a ramp into a bunch of enemies. That it can't be more powerful than is justified by the circumstance, but you do want to reward clever thinking.
Right. There's a little bit here in this section of advice that I don't disagree with on principle, but I disagree with, or on findings, but I disagree with on general approach to role playing games, which is, I think there is a specific Pathfinder brain that doesn't apply to a lot of my groups, right?
Yeah.
Which,
yes. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean when I say
know
Pathfinder
what you mean.
brain?
If there seems to be a worry that if you let your players get away with too much, they will abuse it, which is not something that, which I think is very like
run into
is a very like meta gamey, power gamey, mechanistic player problem that I have many other types of players in my games who are problems for other reasons. But if I let them do something cool, they're not going, like the example here is, for example, you think a PC's attempt to grapple a spider to aim its web attack at another foe is so fun, you let them do it, but you're worried that the effect would be so powerful that the PCs would just carry around a spider to shoot webs for the rest of the campaign. Like, that is a thing that you might have to worry about with certain players. That is not the type of player that I generally have in my groups. So, but that is a genuine concern, that if you let them do something fun and situationally cool, that then they will try to weaponize it, which is a legitimate concern. But it is a real Pathfinder.
It's a legitimate concern with some players.
Yeah. But
Pathfinder brain is like if you let someone rolling a barrel at someone knock 3 enemies prone, then that player concludes that barrels are the ultimate weapon and will carry them everywhere. It's just
tow
like,
a cart of barrels to every combat and be Donkey Kong, and then you're stuck with the barrel roller.
But this is very useful advice if you have players who have what we have now coined as Pathfinder brain. So there's some great, and one of the things I love about Paizo's new stuff is they moved a lot of the safety tools and consent stuff to the core rulebook instead of in the Game Master's Guide. There's some advice on, how to use those tools in the best ways. Some advice for problematic players, power imbalances, what to do if the party wipes. And some ideas on collaborative narration and playing an organized play. Not my favorite thing. I haven't ever had fun at a Pathfinder organized play event, but that's okay. Organized play is not for everyone.
I can see how it might be fun, and often I am tempted to try it, and then I remember that no, it has never been fun for me, but I'm glad that it exists, and I hope that other people have fun doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but like Matt said, a lot of these core safety tools and problem resolution things are in the core rulebook, which is good. There is good advice on problematic players, how to deal with power imbalance. There's a little section at the end here before it gets crunchy on player needs, and there's 2 things here that I really like this. This could probably be longer, and it's not the only game that has this, but it focuses on the ways that players might process information. So players who are hard of hearing or struggle to process large amounts of sensory information, how to deal with that and how to be conscientious. Lots of games of safety tools talk about disability in terms of being respectful in the way that you speak to those players and how to be conscientious in how you're portraying NPCs. But what they don't often talk about is how to literally accommodate that disability. The other thing here is attention span. And look, these are both things that I personally struggle immensely with as a player. I have ADHD. I have trouble listening.
And as a podcaster.
I have trouble listening to 2 people talk at once in all areas of my life. So I often miss things, and I have to let my GMs and DMs know to repeat things or pay attention. So I liked, again, this is a short section, but I liked that it was here. It's not difficult, the advice that's given, but I appreciated that it was included.
Right. I mean, it's a good reminder, and honestly, again, on our Game Master screen that we're creating, having written on the back, it's okay to repeat yourself. Be generous with your players' attention, right?
Right. The advice here is good, and I think that again, I think this is another sort of GM DM problem, but it's like, it says, hey, some players pay better attention if they're doodling or writing things while they're
Yes.
playing. That doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. Also, it's okay if they're talking or texting, if you bring their attention back when they need to pay attention. This is true and important. I know that it is very frustrating when you're, again, I am a almost always forever GM, and I know that it is frustrating when your players appear to not be paying attention, but it's not necessarily true that they're not paying attention. It's also okay if they get distracted. You have to be, I think, as a GM in the modern world, you have to be forgiving of this, because people's attention spans are worn real thin, and it's okay if they're, not 100% engaged in what you're saying at all times.
I need a sticky note on the back of my Dungeon Master screen that says, drink less when dungeon mastering. when someone's like, I'm getting another beer, you want one, be like, or, hey, Matt, I brought you another beer. Just be like, wait a second.
Hang on.
Give me a LaCroix. I can dungeon master after about 2, maybe 3 drinks, but no more. So
that's good advice.
Then I start missing
I've started waiting until the midway point to let myself have a beer, because
smart.
I have the same problem. I start to fade really badly if I start with a beer and then don't pay attention to how much I'm having.
It's frustrating, especially when like everyone else is having a alcoholic drink, and you're like, yeah, of course I'm gonna have one as well. Pour me a glass of wine too. Yeah. And they're like, wait a second, I have to focus. I'm responsible. I have to watch the toddler here. This is my.
I have to watch all 4 toddlers and make sure that they're, staying within the bounds. Okay.
DDM, Designated Dungeon Master.
We have spent nearly an hour talking about the first 35 pages of this game mastery guide. So maybe this is going to have to be a 2-parter. But what else do we want to talk about in the last few minutes before we sign off? Because there's a lot of, we basically got through the game mastery. Well, we got through most of the game mastery basics section, which is the first chapter.
Right. I think there's some really other, interesting advice in the game mastery basics section that relates to like encounter design and a little bit on adventure design.
Actually, I think we're going to have to talk about this in greater detail, because I really like, because there's 2 sections that I really, really like. I like it from thinking about, I don't know, I love outlines and flowcharts and structure, and there's a really, really good ideas for building the bones of your campaign structure. And then because this is Pathfinder, there's really, really good advice on designing encounters, which I actually would like to talk about in greater detail, because encounter design is one of my, as a GM, it's one of my guilty pleasures. I love to design fiddly, complicated, engaging encounters, and Pathfinder is a game for GMs like me.
Well, so we've got that. We've got monster design, item design. We've got NPCs. We have a whole list of really interesting magic items that, so stick around for those. A lot of them are great to swipe for other games. Some of them you've seen before. I think we have a lot of cool stuff to talk about in our next episode on the Game Mastery Guide.
So I hope you found this useful. I really enjoyed talking about it. We got a lot more to talk about. If you're ever thinking about running Pathfinder, I've absolutely picked this up, but you can get it, like Matt said, for inexpensive as a PDF. And if you are just looking for some inspiration or reading, it's a really, really useful book. It's great advice, especially if you're running a tactical grid-based game.
I would second that recommendation in that I have encountered people who have played Pathfinder First Edition who never got the Game Mastery Guide, because let's say you get the core rule book, have it as a useful reference, and because of the SRD that's out there, you maybe there aren't any missing rules, right? All the rules are available online and for free, because that's very cool. That's the way Paizo does things. And so, some people will leave this book behind, but I would say don't.
Yeah, it's worth it. Absolutely worth it.
If you have a question, I think I would love to hear from our listeners if, like, what is your favorite of these books, right? What is, if you think maybe it's one we've covered on the show before, like the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide or the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide or the Dungeon World GM advice section, what is the best Game Master Guide? Or is it like a third-party book? I don't know. What is your opinion? I haven't formed one yet.
Me neither. I would love to hear opinions. They all have things that I like. I don't think I have not a clear winner. So,
and those opinions can be sent to dmofnone@gmail.com.
You can also add us on Twitter for the time being, as long as it continues to exist, at dmofnone.
And if you enjoy the show for some reason, please leave us a quick rating or review. We appreciate it. If you want more of the show for some reason. We've got like 15 different homebrew posts, like 4 classes, a bunch of monsters and NPCs. Yes, two complete basic classes, one of them perfectly refined, like 4 different one-shot adventures. Actually, 2 of them are not really one-shots. They're more of 2 or 3 shots. They're adventure modules
theoretically one-shots, but yeah.
And a whole like a day of, or at least working day of bonus podcast
That's right.
episodes.
On our Patreon, which is
Yes.
patreon.com/dungeonmasterofnone. We also have a Discord link in the show notes, and you can join and hang out and talk to other DMs and yell at us, and we probably won't respond, but we theoretically are there.
Who often give better advice than we do.
Yeah, there are a lot of people in the Discord who are smarter than us. They just don't have a podcast.
Like, oh,
so
I'm
listen
just
to
like
them.
in there
Yeah.
like, hey, that's like really good advice for your problem. And speaking of Discord and patron, shout out to our patron on our patron only Discord, DM Jord. No, sorry, let me look this up. DM Jord for giving us this suggestion to review the Game Mastery Guide.
Yes, thank you. Also, if you've given us another suggestion in the Patreon channel, we listened. We're going to get to it. We're very slow and lazy. So, thank you for listening, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.
I've got Dungeon Master's Guide. I've got 12-sided die.